Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Life in the Cosmos with me, Riley Adair. I'm so happy to have you back today. In case you haven't noticed, the astrology is crazy right now. So, what does that mean? The astrology is crazy. Look at your life. Has your life been feeling like so much stuff is happening? All of these changes are taking place, and the speed of events are picking up more rapidly than you ever even could have imagined. Well, even if you haven't noticed that, there's a reason for it. There's always an astrological reason for basically everything I'm learning. So, what we're going to be going over today is eclipses. Why are we going over this? Well, because we have two major eclipses coming up in September. So, there's a Pisces lunar eclipse on September 7th, and there's a full solar eclipse in Virgo on September 21st. So, what are eclipses? Eclipses signal major endings and major beginnings. They are considered fated events, events that eclipses will take things out of your life for good. So anything that falls away from your life during an eclipse, it's probably falling away for good. Things that come into your life during eclipse seasons, these are things that are destined to grow. So an eclipse window. It takes about 2 years for an eclipse cycle to finish up. So right now we're having eclipses in Pisces and in Virgo. So the first eclipse of this eclipse cycle actually happened on September 17th of 2024. The last eclipse will happen in Virgo on February 20th, 2027. So this is basically creating a whole story. And you may not know exactly how this story is going to unfold and what this story is going to mean for you. But in retrospect, it will all make sense. So there are two types of eclipses. There is a lunar eclipse. That is when the Earth comes in between the sun and the moon, and then you'll get something like a blood moon. A lunar eclipse represents culminations, things coming to an end, an emotional cycle that's kind of being shed. There's something culminating and being released with a lunar eclipse. So, our first eclipse on September 7th will be a lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. The other eclipse is a solar eclipse, and this will be taking place on September 21st. So that's when the moon passes between the earth and the sun, and that's when we need the special glasses to look at everything because, you go blind. And if you've ever actually witnessed an eclipse and been around, it is such a crazy experience because it'll be the middle of day and all of a sudden it almost feels like everything goes quiet, everything goes dark, and all you see is like this fiery ring. And that's actually just the outside of the sun because the moon's now in front of the sun, blocking the light of the sun. And it feels mystical. It feels magical. It honestly is so eerie, but so cool. So we have these two eclipses, but add a week or two on to each side of the eclipses, and that's the entire eclipse corridor for this segment of the cycle. So you may start feeling the effects of the lunar eclipse from August 31st to September 14th. And then we're ramping right back up for the solar eclipse in Virgo from the 14th of September to the 28th of September. So even though we are talking about these eclipses that are happening in September 2025, this entire eclipse cycle is happening until February of 2027. So what I'm going to tell you today about how the eclipse is going to affect you and your life is going to be relevant for that 2 year period or like a year and a half long period. So eclipses, an entire eclipse cycle takes around 2 and a bit years. And this is when we see the unfoldings of fate and things start to change. Eclipses can often be these very interesting stories. So let's say it's the things that happen that you don't actually think will change your life, but then end up changing your life in a huge way. A very common example that I use would be at the first eclipse, you pick up a book, you think nothing of it because it's just a book. And then by the second eclipse, you've read that book has changed your life, or, it's made you want to get into some group so you can discuss the book. And then through discussing the book and going into a group, you end up meeting these friends who end up being, and then through those friends, you end up meeting a new lover, and then a whole relationship starts, and all of that started just because you picked up a book. So it's often the things that can fly under the radar that end up changing your life. So what I always recommend, especially in the weeks surrounding an eclipse, so the 2 week period on either side of an eclipse, pay attention to the thoughts you have, the ideas that just come to you, the things you start, because these could all be major indications of the eclipse story for you. Also, pay attention to what falls away, what changes. People will often notice, particularly if the eclipse is affecting their cadent houses. So, your first house of self, your fourth house of home, seventh house of marriage, and 10th house of career. People will often really notice those eclipses because these are, pillars of our life, cornerstones of our life. And even if it's not affecting a cadent house in your birth chart, the eclipse energy, it can feel like a tornado. It can feel like everything's ramping up, and this is a time where it's like there's a lot of things happening globally. It's huge news weeks with like everything happening, or lots of people dying or breaking up, or babies being born, or relationships being started. The key word here, or the key words here, are major endings and major beginnings. In this episode, I'm going to tell you how the eclipses are going to be affecting your life. I'm going to be telling you the areas of your life to watch out for and the major endings and beginnings that take place there. And please leave in the comments, tell me your experience. We've already been in this eclipse cycle for a year now. So you might have an inkling of what this story is, even if you don't know how the story is going to end, okay? And if you want to follow along, what I'm going to encourage you to do is, if you haven't already, please go to AstroSeek and pull up your birth chart. So your birth chart is going to ask you for your time of birth and your place and your date, and that will give you your birth chart. And this is extremely important because this is how we can use astrology to predict, events that will occur in our lives. The time is very important because that sets the tone for the chart. If you thought you were born at 6:30 and you're Gemini rising, but you're actually born at 8:30 and you're a Leo rising, well, that's a totally different life. That's a totally different everything. So I would just say, please try to make sure you have the most accurate birth time. And if what I described to you doesn't sound like anything that you're going through, it might be a sign that you just don't have the right birth time. So, like I said, once you pull up your chart, I want you to look at where Pisces and where Virgo fall in your birth chart. Let's talk about these signs. Let's start with Pisces. So, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of luck, abundance, expansion, and growth. Jupiter loves higher learning, higher education, loves to seek out the mystical, the spiritual. Jupiter's very generous. Jupiter gives and gives and gives and gives. Pisces is deeply spiritual. Pisces is incredibly loving. Pisces is creative and ethereal. And there's something about going with the flow. And going with the flow is a beautiful thing, but we need to know when and where the flow is starting and stopping. And that is the struggle of Pisces because Pisces loves with no limits and Pisces loves with no boundaries. And wherever we have Pisces in our chart, it can show areas where we can give too much or where we can show this beautiful energy of like a heart-centered love of like thinking we're all one and we're all gonna care for each other. But it also asks you, what are the limits to your love? And what are the limits to your escapism? Because Pisces in modern astrology, even though I'm not really like very much of a modern astrologer, Pisces is ruled by Neptune, and Neptune is the planet of illusions and dreams and fog. So it's like Neptune will create this like beautiful picture, and you'll be like, wow, this is an amazing, amazing work of art, only to find out that the picture was never real, that the art was actually just a beautiful sequencing of smoke, basically. Virgo is directly opposite Pisces. So this means that they're sister signs. They are almost like they're like soulmates. They're two sides of the same polarity. Pisces is endlessly loving, endlessly giving, and it's a big picture sign. This is a sign ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter's all about the big picture. Virgo is all into the details. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication, money, merchants, any type of like mercantile activity. Mercury is details, little details, particularly Mercury in Virgo, all about the details. Virgo is critical. Okay. Virgo is analytical. Virgo is a seeker of mystic lore. Virgo is grounded in the earth and in the practical, intangible modalities of life, whereas Pisces is all about the emotion, the heart, the dreams, the ether, basically. Virgo is like, let's plant our feet in the ground, let's go through our routines, figure out our routines, and figure out how to perfect those routines. A beautiful part of Virgo is that it has the ability to take in so much information at once and spot the one error in the in basically an ocean. So Virgo has this ability to focus on all of these small details at once. So what I want you to do now is I want you to look at the areas of your life or look at the areas of your chart that are ruled by Pisces and Virgo. So there will be two parts of the chart directly opposite to each other. And just look at it, see what you can ascertain there, and pay attention as well. If you have a lot of planets there, this is going to show you that these eclipses are going to be extra important for you. So now that you've found where Pisces and Virgo fall in your chart, you may be wondering, what does that even mean, Riley? Like, what are we even doing here? Well, I'm going to show you a wheel that shows the houses and the different significations of the houses. And the areas that are ruled by Pisces and Virgo are going to show you the areas of your life that are going to get lit up by these eclipses. So this is a wheel that shows the different houses and their significations. So I'm just going to start. If you've pulled up your birth chart, this is the helm, the first house. This is the house that has your rising sign. So this is your body, your identity, how your appearance, and your just overall your physical form. And some would even say the themes that will be prominent within your life. The second house is the gate of Hades. So this is values, finances, income, self-worth, possessions. We'll get all into this much deeper later on. The third house is the house of the goddess. So this is your siblings, your extended family, anything learning, any type of course, education, early childhood education, short trips, and messages. Short trips are like, week-long trips, a little vacay here and there. The fourth house is called the subterranean place. So this is the place of home, where you live, where you sleep, where you lay your head to rest, your parents, your family, and your place of origin, your private life, the life that happens behind closed doors, and death. So that's more of an ancient astrology signification of the fourth house. A lot of modern astrologers will only put death in the eighth place, but it's also in the fourth. The fifth house is the house of good fortune. So it's everything and anything that you create. So this could be a business, a child, some art type thing. It also rules sex and dating and pleasure. The sixth house is the place of bad fortune. It rules illness, any type of bodily illness that, like, you'd end up in the hospital for. It also rules animals, and subordinates. So, like back in ancient astrology, they said slaves for the sixth house, but we're not on the slave. We're not doing slaves anymore. At least we hope not. So then the seventh place is called the setting place. So this is the place directly opposite the first house. So this is your place of marriage and relationships, those one-on-one relationships, your front row. The eighth house is the inactive house, the idle place. This is inheritances, assets of other people, death. These are all the things that basically you don't have an active hand in, but you either benefit from or kind of get looped into in some type of way. The ninth house is the place of God, foreign places, philosophy, travel, higher learning, anything where you're staring out at the horizon, like going on a trip for for a year-long period and totally changing your life, or going to like some monastery or whatever. The 10th house is the midheaven. Your midheaven can actually fall in a few different houses, but this house is called the house of the midheaven. So this is your career, reputation, actions, your public face, anything that impacts your public standing. Are you married? Are you divorced? Do you have children? Are you a mother, a father, whatever? What's your career? How do people perceive you in this life, basically? The 11th house is the place of good fortune, communities, friends, networks, hopes, dreams, any area of like large groups of people, whether this is like fairs or the internet. The 12th house is the house of bad spirit. So this is a place of isolation, loss, mental health, seclusion, hospitals, any retreats, anything where you're retreating and going into a period of solitude. So these are the 12 houses. I'm just taking it way back for the beginners who may be listening here. And what I asked from you earlier is to look at the houses that are ruled by Pisces and Virgo in your birth chart and look at some of these significations and see, have these areas of life been being activated in the since September of 2024? And what is the story happening in these parts of your life? If you want to take it a step further, you can take a look and see if you have a stellium, which is 3 or more planets, in these houses, in Pisces or Virgo, or even any of the mutable signs, because they'll be receiving a square. We're getting a little bit more advanced here. But if you do have planets in these signs, like a more advanced technique that you may do is to apply the significations of the planets that are being impacted by the eclipses. So, like, let's just go through them. Like the sun signifies your consciousness. Mars indicates, driving forward towards something, your force, your get up and go. You're also like cutting and severing and burning are very Martian type things. Venus is love, unity, woman, art, beauty, marriage. So you can kind of see we're starting to put a couple pieces of the puzzle together here. There's so much when looking at a chart, but don't worry, we're going to break it all down in a general way, but we'll break it down. Think back to 2015 to 2017 and think about what was happening in your life then. The nodes, so the north and south node, which are the eclipse points, were last in Pisces and Virgo from 2015 to 2017. So you may see a reoccurrence of some of the themes that were coming up in your life then and how they're going to reoccur in your life now in new or in different ways. You can even go back in 8 to 10 year increments from now, 2015 to 2017, and then 2005 to 2007, and kind of see all the times that Pisces and Virgo eclipses were activated and what was happening in your life then. On September 7th is happening, it's a lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. This eclipse is actually really, really positive because it's ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is called the greater benefic. What does that mean? What does benefic mean? Benefic, I always think of benefic as like a gift giver. If you're born during the day, this is going to be extra positive for you because Jupiter's your most positive planet. So this is great. We love it. An eclipse that represents shedding and letting go and a culmination of things being ruled by a very happy and very positive planet. But this eclipse has an extra dose of sparkles or happiness or however you want to phrase it because it's receiving a supportive trine from its ruling planet Jupiter in Cancer. So the moon's going to be in Pisces, and the ruler of Pisces is Jupiter, and Jupiter's in Cancer. Now, why is this special? Well, trines are aspects, basically configurations in the sky that are very positive. Trines and lend an easy flow and just a greater ease to things basically. And Jupiter is currently in the best place that it can possibly be in Cancer because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So what is exalted? What does an exalted planet means? It means that it's raised up in a position of like being a king or a queen. It's in a position where it can give you the greatest extents of its gifts. So this is exceptionally positive. This is also really interesting because for since March of 2023, Saturn, the planet of limits and restrictions, has been moving through Pisces. The Pisces area of your chart, and again, I encourage you to look at what house is ruled by Pisces in your chart so that you can really fully grasp what I'm saying right now, is has been getting hit. So, especially if you're a nighttime baby, so born anytime after the sun went down, Saturn is going to be really, really tough. It's going to be the toughest planet in your chart. So, having spent around 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years in the sign of Pisces, that means that that area of your life may have not come easily to you. There may have been a problem that you've been trying to solve for quite some time now. You've been putting a lot of effort and energy, and you may not see how all that effort and energy is amalgamating into creating something beautiful because you've kind of had the bitterness and the basically like cold water cloth to a fire type vibe that is Saturn. Saturn's like, oh, you're excited? Let's cool it all the way down. Let's try to be a little bit more depressed. And maybe let's try to take all your big dreams and let's put them in a really small box because Saturn loves limits. And Saturn loves to ask you, are you being authentic to yourself? Is what you're doing in this Pisces part of your chart truly authentic to what you desire? So, all of this to say, the Pisces part of your chart you've been going through an odyssey in this part of your life. An odyssey is a long journey. And it is so positive to see a lunar eclipse, a shedding and letting go happening in Pisces with a supportive trine from Jupiter because I think it indicates that we may see some positive results, some fruits of our labor after a long period of Saturn transiting Pisces. Saturn will still transit Pisces until February 13th. So, like I said, the story's not over, but it gives me the vibe of like a brief win that lets us be like, okay, I see a brief win and we're going to keep on moving because we got to keep on moving. We have, another year and a bit of this and another 6 months of Saturn and Pisces. So this is great. We have an awesome eclipse September 7th. And then there is a total vibe shift because we have the next eclipse on September 21st is happening at an anaretic degree, 29 degrees, which is like a culminating degree, a very in a decan of Virgo that is very dark, very has a lot to do with like I've read about like bloodshed and death. It's all not to say that this is going to happen to you. It's just that's just what the decan of Virgo represents. So the on September 21st, we're having a solar eclipse in Virgo. Solar eclipses represent like the inception of things that's new seeds that are starting to be planted and growing, things that are developing. If a lunar eclipse is letting go, a solar eclipse is like a fated event, something coming into your life so that you didn't previously expect to be there. Now, why is this solar eclipse in Virgo so much more crazy? Well, it's because the we're at the same time we're going to be going through a Mars and Pluto square. So Mars is definitely malefic and Pluto has some malefic qualities. So on a global level, we're thinking, politics, not just your life, but like global politics. Mars is a planet of action and aggression and war. It signifies major people of authority and people of power, specifically men in power, and specifically like military authorities. Pluto represents like the oligarchy, like the people who are the wealthiest of the wealthy, the people who are actually running the world's behind the scenes, or not even behind the scenes. A perfect example of the oligarchy and Pluto, specifically Pluto and Aquarius, which is what we are experiencing right now, is the image of all the major tech leaders at Donald Trump's inauguration, like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. And I don't know, there was one other guy there, like the leader of Twitter. I'm not sure. Oh, Elon Musk. So a Mars and Saturn square is again another aspect. So another configuration in the sky and squares cause tension. They cause, there has to be a choice made. There's friction, there's a heat building up. So this can represent, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up having some extremely violent events happening. Pluto has to do with the underworld and organized crime. So it's like the underworld and the organized crime that happens behind the scenes, but also the kind of crime that's happening right in front of our eyes. Like I would say with Pluto in Aquarius, Aquarius is a sign of technology. It is a sign of forward thinking and innovation and in societal structures. Mars is a bomb. Mars is a fire. Mars is like anger and aggression coming and imploding that. So we're seeing some changes to structures that we previously thought were indomitable. And in the same way, we're also seeing that some of the structures we've been relying on are deeply flawed and deeply corrupt. So this is a lot of the energy that's coming up. And even though what I'm talking about with the eclipses is going to span until February of 2027, there is just some very interesting astrology happening right now in September 2025 because even on the day before the lunar eclipse in Pisces on the 7th, Uranus is stationing retrograde in Gemini. So Uranus is a planet of surprises, for lack of a better word. It's a planet of electricity and upheavals and eccentricities and technology. And it's like Uranus is like your kooky neighbor, like not even your kooky aunt, your kooky neighbor who has like means well, but like builds a whole bunch of like random gizmos and gadgets in his backyard and has like hair out to here and is like electrocuting himself all the time and is like muttering to himself, but is actually brilliant and like totally a genius. So, whatever the reason why this is important is because Uranus just moved into Gemini. So, again, look at the house ruled by Gemini in your chart. Is Gemini ruled by your does does Gemini rule your first house, meaning you're a Gemini rising? And how is that kooky energy going to show up in your life? How is that kooky energy going to show up in your identity? Why is this retrograde important? This retrograde is important because it's the first retrograde of Uranus in Gemini. So it's really going to give us a snippet of what the next 7 years will bring with your Uranus and Gemini. It's going to be the first time we're really going to get a reveal of what will this transit bring us. But without further ado, let's get back to the eclipses. We've covered the energy of the eclipses, what they mean. Now, please scroll to the timestamp that holds your rising sign. I'm going to be doing two rising signs at the same time, the sister signs, because the eclipses bounce back and forth on an axis. So it will all apply. Hello, Pisces and Virgo risings. Welcome. You guys are the stars of the show for the next few years. This is so exciting. So, if you're a Pisces or Virgo rising, which I hope you are if you're watching this timestamp, that means that the eclipses have been taking place across your first house of self and your seventh house of marriage or your seventh house of other. So this eclipse window from September of 2024 to February of 2027, this time period will see major endings and major beginnings in the areas of yourself. So your physical body, your identity and how you identify within the world, your life direction, and your appearance. The seventh house is the house of the other. So this is your marriage partner, your best one-on-one type friendships that extend far beyond just a friend, but like to your front row, like your best friends. The seventh house also has anything to do with one-on-one interaction. So therapists have a lot of seventh house placements, anything where you're working closely and intimately with one other person. So, what does that mean? Let me just remind you that eclipses are major endings and major beginnings. So, there's a million ways this story can play out for you. And I'm talking in the broadest possible sense because life is different for everybody. I'm going to give you a few examples though. So, during a first house and seventh house eclipse axis, there was a story of someone who started school for the first time. So they were going to school, and this was a totally new environment for them. And it was the first time that they had been away from their romantic partner. And so they were having to figure out like who they were as just an individual, as opposed to, being with someone. And then in that time period, they came out as non-binary, like their perception of their identity shifted and they actually like accepted their identity more. And then they had to figure out their, how that would impact their relationship. So, not just being in school for the first time, but being non-binary and what that meant for them and their partner. So, it's like, it's odd because we don't always think of ourselves and our relationships in tandem and so closely together, but these things are so closely interlinked in life, like how you view yourself and how you show up in the world, how you dress, how you do your hair. Do you not give a hoot what you wear? Or do you really put a lot of thought and effort into your outfits and into your appearance? This is all first house stuff, baby. We also have things like things actually happening to your physical form. So, having a glow up would be here, like having plastic surgery would be here, having some ailment that would affect your mobility. That I would see that more in like the sixth house, 12th house type vibe, but it could be here too, getting a little cut on your face. The first house is all about your face and your appearance and your body. This can be just big changes in your body and also in the vehicle in which you move through life. The first house is called the helm, where we steer the ship, is the helm. So this is where if you're going to have a major identity crisis or a change in your life, overall life direction, it is very likely to happen under these eclipses. This is where sometimes we enter a totally new car. We're just in a whole new vehicle because we're moving through the world in a completely different way. And does that start out with something small? Does it start out with, oh, you have a new hobby, and that at the first eclipse you picked up a new hobby, and then by the second eclipse you're totally engrossed in this hobby and it's making you think about how you need to like change how you communicate or change how you dress or change how you move through the world. And then now that you become so engulfed in this hobby, your partner's like, what about me? Like, where do I fit into this picture? And then you guys are figuring that out together. Another really common thing with first and seventh house eclipses is the energy of like breaking up with someone or getting in a relationship. So, if you've been moving through this world single as a Pringle, you know, totally on an island, completely by yourself, moving through life, so aware of who you are. And then in this eclipse window, you end up getting into a relationship, and now you're figuring out, okay, I was so comfortable living my life in my own lane, and now I have to figure out like how to have a relationship with someone and how to be myself and be in a relationship. And what does that look like? Do I change because I'm in a relationship? Or do I take on characteristics of my partner? Or how is my partner influencing my life and my views of myself? So, with these things that I'm describing, there is no inherently good or inherently bad. Eclipses are not going to tell you the quality of the time period. That is to say, it's not going to tell you is it positive or is it negative, but it will. I mean, if you have a malefic in one of those places in Pisces or in Virgo, a malefic is Mars or Saturn, or a benefic, so a positive planet, which is Venus or Jupiter, that can give you an idea if you have of like the quality of the time period. But that's a little bit more of an advanced technique that we don't necessarily need to get into today. The eclipses aren't going to determine whether or not it's going to be positive or negative. That's a story that's going to be very much reflected upon your individual chart. But we can see this theme of figuring out who you are and then figuring out who you are in relationship with other people. Another thing that I would see really commonly is you've been in a relationship for a really long time, so used to that relationship, and for whatever reason, you completely lost yourself. Like it's like you just became that person's partner, or there was a theme of codependency, and then you break up and now you got to figure out like who you are again and who you are as a whole human being and what does it mean to be single. I did hear another story of someone whose partner came out as trans, and that ended up giving this person a whole identity crisis because they had always been in same-sex marriages or same-sex unions, and now all of a sudden they were going to be in what was basically like a somewhat straight relationship. So all of these stories are so wide and varied, and that's just because that's astrology. It's like there's always themes. There's always the interconnecting themes that are going to show up, but how exactly they show up is going to be dependent on your own astrology and your own birth chart and you as a human being, you as a person. One thing I also want to remind you guys is that your first house is the only house in your chart that actually represents you. So having first and seventh house eclipses can indicate, yeah, there might be some major changes happening with you, but also major changes happening with your partner that end up impacting you. So Pisces and Virgo, you guys are in for a total transformation of yourself. So please leave a comment. Let me know. Have you seen this starting to take place? What is this story for you? Can you describe it in the comments? Do you see yourself in some of these stories that I'm relaying? And if not, do you just see it in the overall themes and directions? Either way, good luck, Pisces and Virgos. You guys are going to do great. And I hope the changes that manifest are changes for the better. Hello, Aquarius and Leo risings. You guys are having eclipses go between your second house of finances and your eighth house of death, inheritances, and other people's money. Let's break it down. The second house is called the Gate of Hades. The second house rules possessions, everything you own, your finances, how you make your money, your financial situation in general, and your feelings of self-worth. I always associate the second house with the place of the ego. If the first house is the self, the second house is where the ego and our attachments are starting to be made. And I say the ego because sometimes, especially in this world, so much of what we have ends up dictating our perceived worth in society. If you have a lot of money, you're successful, and if you don't, you're not, which is the metric that people seemingly love to use, but I'm not sure if that's entirely true. And with its connection to the ego, the second house has large connections with our feelings of confidence and self-worth. The second house is the assets that we have, the tangible things that we own, the things that are of value, and not just the things that are of value, but what we value. The second house is what your values are. Do you value money and wealth and climbing the corporate ladder, or do you value time and time with your friends and time spent on the lake or doing art or whatever it is? It's the second house is our values. Another interesting thing with the second house is people who have strong second house placements, they can often be entrepreneurs, people who are bringing money in through their side hustle or their side hustle that turned into a business. The second house is all about how we make our money. And So people with strong second house placements are often business type people. The eighth house is the house of death. So I typically see this as like other people dying, inheritances, and other people's money. So what does that mean? Death, I don't want to scare you. It doesn't mean that so and so is gonna die. There is a honestly there is a potential that someone in your life could die, but lots of people go through second and eighth house eclipses without anyone dying. So don't worry. There's a lot of things that the eighth house represents. So death and things to do with death. So this would be dealing with, let's say someone died, and then for the next year, you're dealing with their will and all the things that they own, and you're divvying up their basically like their entire net worth and giving it out to the people that they allotted it to. So, this is the house of inheritances. These are the things that you didn't ask to own, but they just came to you. So, this is like someone whose grandma left them $50,000 and now all of a sudden they have this extra cash in the bank, or someone's uncle left them a house, or someone's aunt left them a business, or whatever it is. It's inheritances. It can also be things like other people's money. So people with strong eighth house placements often work in finance, investing other people's money, or they work in like taxes where they're auditing people's money. And so anything, think the second and eighth house axis is extremely financial. There's something happening here. The eighth house also represents debt. So this is like, you bought a house with your partner and now you're in debt. Now you have bought into a mortgage that you have to pay, or you took a loan out for a business. That's a second house thing, having a business, and now you are responsible for that loan. You took someone's money and now you're going to have to pay it back. The eighth house also represents like the esoteric. This is more of a modern day signification. I haven't really seen anything in ancient astrology that refers to this, but I guess it's probably has to do with like things like just death in general is going to be like esoteric and occult. But this is like having an interest in death, having an interest in like taxidermy, or often things that people find a little bit weird and gruesome and dark, that a lot of times people don't really want to get involved with. But if you have strong eighth house placements, maybe that kind of stuff just like lights your lights your fancy, or whatever it is. That's something you're into. The eighth house is also, it's like the house of the sugar daddy. Like, so it's like maybe you get in a relationship with someone and they have a lot of money, so you end up benefiting from that. So, in second and eighth house eclipses, you may be rearranging how you're spending your money and how you're making your money and what it is that you even value in this life. And then you may be dealing with the eighth house side of things, like your inheritances that you've received from other people, money that you've benefited from that belongs to other people, like a sugar daddy, like an uncle or a parent, or someone who just is like wants to support your lifestyle. On a more psychological level, if the second house is your values and your ego, the eighth house, like I said, is attachments and things that belong to other people. So, what is that? I really deeply perceive the eighth house to be the house of like dark corners and dark places. So, this is like what was in your family lineage that has been passed down to you. So that could be like an actual heirloom, a locket, a necklace, whatever. But it could be like generational trauma, generational issues in regards to attachment. The seventh house is the place of marriage, and the eighth house is where we get down to the nitty-gritty. So this is like intimacy in the rawest form. This is where you're truly like naked and vulnerable. The eighth house often also has to do with like sex as well. So the fifth house is like the fun, carefree, light sex. The eighth house is like we're staring each other in the eyes and something big is happening here and we're like getting into each other's kinks and now you know me better than I know myself and now I'm having to face how the way I acted is actually reflective of how my mother was treated by my grandmother and da 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 da. Like it's a bit of a dark hole, really. And it's funny because if you have a relationship with a lot of like eighth house placements, it will take you to those places that you often fear to go because we often fear, the dark. We fear the shadowy corners. We fear the death. We fear things we can't understand. And so this might take you into a total process of revealing yourself and revealing your attachments and your connection to intimacy and how that is always working in tandem with how you feel about yourself, your feelings of self-confidence, your feelings of self-worth. Are you a confident person or do you struggle with self-sabotaging behaviors and constantly belittling yourself? So it's interesting because there's all of these like outer world, very tangible manifestations of the second and the eighth house, but there are deeper roots that connect us to our psyches and our relationships to ourselves and to other people on a level that is not seen, but rather felt very deeply. And I think it's kind of very apt that death is here because if death is here, grief is here. And what are those things that we haven't processed that we've left in the dark for too long? And now it's time to figure them out. And that's why I always think it's very interesting that the second house is called the Gate of Hades, because Hades is the god of the underworld. And the second house is the access point to finances. And then, therefore, we get into issues of greed and, overly identifying with material things or overly identifying with some facade that you're using to make yourself feel better. It's it's almost like it kind of gives me the vibe of like the seven deadly sins in a way, like gambling and getting into debt, or even if you're working through these second and eighth house eclipses, maybe taxes are becoming a big thing. Like you're worried about paying your taxes, or you haven't paid your taxes and now it's probably a good time to worry. Or, your business booms and you're having more money come in than ever. And then as a result, you're having to spend more money. Or because your partner ended up getting a really good job, now you're able to launch your business because you don't have to take care of the household expenses as much. So these are the second and eighth house things. I've explained very broad themes because the way that this eclipse is going to manifest is not going to be the same for everyone. I need to remind you that eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. They are not going to dictate the quality of the time period. That is to say, they're not going to tell you, is the time period going to be bad or is it going to be good? If you want insight into that, look at if there are planets in the signs of Pisces and Virgo in your birth chart. Are they benefic planets? So are they happy and positive and gift-giving planets like Venus and Jupiter? Or are they malefic planets? Planets that create struggle and obstacles like Saturn and Mars. That's more of an advanced technique, but that is how we can start to add some layers of depth into this story. Do you see these themes becoming important in your life? Have they been important since September of 2024? And what is this story that's unfolding here? Please like, comment, and subscribe. But more than anything, please write your story in the comments, in the YouTube video, on the Spotify video. I want to hear your stories. Hello, Capricorn and Cancer risings. The eclipses have been happening in your third house and in your ninth house since September of 2024 until February of 2027. So let's get into it. What does that mean? Well, this is a really great time to divulge that in your birth chart, the first house is the only part of the chart that truly represents you. And every other place, every other house in your chart represents someone else in your life or some other aspect of your life. And this is very prominent for you because the eclipses are going between your third and your ninth house. So, what is that? The third house is the house of siblings, neighborhood, communication, short distance travel, and learning. So this is the third house. Having eclipses going through your third house can be major changes happening in your siblings' lives. Like, are they having a baby? Are they getting a job and somehow that impacts you? Are your siblings moving in with you? And now all of a sudden you're like very close with your siblings, or are are you starting a business with your siblings or something to do with your siblings? This can also extend to your extended family. So, did your aunt have something happen and now whatever happened to your aunt is now impacting you, or, anything to do with that? It's also your neighborhood. So I think in this day and age, we often don't really think about our neighborhoods because we're not as enmeshed in the neighborhood community. But the third house can be like having eclipses in the third house can be, becoming a part of the neighborhood watch, or all of a sudden getting closer with your neighbors and actually hanging out with your neighbors. They're doing potlucks. I met a lady who had these eclipses and she is like the leader of her neighborhood community and they do all these parties for her neighborhood. And it's like the community that you can walk around and traverse through easily. The third house is also has rules like education. So I always think of the third house as like education that has like a definitive start and stop. So this could be like starting doing a 6 week course, doing a 10 week course, or anything to do with like early childhood education. So people who work in elementary schools, people who are teachers, people who are like just or even honestly, going back to school, if it's like for a definitive short time period, and or like just anything where you're learning. The third house also has to do with communication, messages. It's anything that moves from one place to another. So this is, it's not just the words you speak, it's not just the emails you send, it's stuff like this, a podcast, it's writing, it's how are you getting your voice out into the world? And are you comfortable speaking your truth? What is your communication style? And is it supportive of the life that you want to live? Is it supportive of who you want to be? So the eclipses in our third house can create changes in how we communicate, whether it's the modalities that we're choosing to communicate on, like are you writing articles on Substack? Are you doing a podcast? Or did you go from screaming and being a raging bitch to all of a sudden being like, I need to try nonviolent communication and learn how to communicate or watch my tone? Or did you ever have a really hard time speaking your truth? So you always swallowed your truth, maybe specifically with your siblings or your relatives or just within your school. And now all of a sudden you're having to find your voice. You're having to figure out how to speak up for yourself. This would also be someone who's like doing the third house also rules short distance travel. So this is like someone who's going to Miami for a few days, or even like if you're traveling on a plane for a long time, if the trip is like 1 or 2 weeks and you're just kind of like going and coming back, that's a third house type of travel. And because the third house rules travel, it also rules cars. So if you have third house eclipses or prominent third house placements in your birth chart, one thing I often see is people getting very involved in cars. Race car drivers have prominent third house placements. I've met people who like love tinkering with cars and engines and anything that goes fast. They have a lot of third house placements, motorcycles, horses, like literally any mode of getting from one place to another. The third house has a lot to do with mobility and communication. So major endings and major beginnings with mobility and communication. So what is that? Maybe you start a dance class that you love and you're finding new ways of moving your body, or maybe you join a running club or a walking club or a book club in your neighborhood. That would be such a third house thing. Um, I know a lot of dancers have very prominent third house placements because it's all about movement, all about constant motion. And in a lot of ways, it is a form of messaging and communication. The art that you create tells a story. The third house is a story. It's also the house of like messages and the place of the goddess. So this is where I would think of like people receiving messages from spirits or messages from the gods, whatever you want to really say here, like connecting to the place of the goddess, connecting to your feminine in a way. The ninth house is, if the third house is everything that's close to us, the ninth house is the horizons we set our eyes upon, the the vast lands that we know nothing about. If the third house ends up so that you travel to nearby towns giving speeches, that would be such a third house thing to do. The ninth house is you travel all over the world. You're gone for like a whole year and you're giving large sermons or, changing at universities. So the ninth house is it rules higher learning. So what is higher learning? It's often associated with, university, or it's often associated with like philosophy or astrology or religion, anything where the learning is so vast, there's almost no end to it. Like the third house is like there's like a finite end to the learning. There's like we have this set thing that we're going to learn, and then the ninth house is like what we're learning is so vast and so broad that there is no end, and that's what keeps us going. So this can be something as literal as like starting university, starting I actually went to college on these third and ninth house eclipses. It can also mean connecting more to your spirituality, connecting to organized religion, um, connecting to a search for a higher meaning, a search for something bigger than you. This is the ninth house is the place of God, and the third house is the place of the goddess. So the ninth house often has to do with travel. Like I said, the third house is short distance travel. The ninth house is you're moving abroad for a year. You're going to have a crazy experience for an extended period of time that is going to completely change your idea of the world and how you fit into it. The ninth house is the place of foreign lands, foreign people, foreign cultures. So this could be, having a lot of foreign people around you or being in a foreign land and, you know, discovering something new and finding something new. And so it's like, if we think about it, the third house is you're in your community, you're in your neighborhood, and maybe you're an activist within the neighborhood. And the ninth house is you're out of your community, you're in someone else's community, like an ocean away. And now you're learning what it's like to be in someone else's neighborhood. And what's that neighborhood like? And what does it inform you about your life and your homeland and how things should be done differently? Or does it change your philosophy on life? Does it broaden your worldview? Does it ask you to live differently than how you've lived before? So, I gave a couple of examples of what the third and ninth house axis is. Is it, you go on a trip, you backpack the world with your sister or your brother? Do you start a community reading organization with your cousin and then end up going on a trip to wherever, some far off place? There's so many ways that this can all manifest, which is why I'm trying to give you the broadest delineations of these places. It's also like, did you find your voice? And then did you put your voice into your PhD dissertation? Did you present your dissertation? Did you use your voice and then present it to this higher authority in this higher place of higher learning like university? This is happening for you since September of 2024 to February of 2027. Please, in the comments, write your experiences of this. What has this been like for you? I would love to know. And yeah, tell me your story. I want to hear it. Thank you. And like, comment, and subscribe, guys. Hello, my beautiful Sagittarius and Geminis. You guys, since September of 2024 until February of 2027, have had eclipses going across your fourth house of home and family and your 10th house of career. So let's get into it. So, again, eclipses are major endings and major beginnings. The way that these things are going to take shape probably won't be obvious at first. It'll be like many crumbles of the cookie, and all of a sudden the cookies disappeared, or or we've actually finally cooked the cookie and something totally new has arrived. So, the fourth house is called the subterranean place. The fourth house is the parents. It's often specifically the father or the parent who was not your primary caregiver. The fourth house, because of its connection to the parents, it's connected to your entire lineage. So, your ancestors, the line that you were born from. It is the place of origin. So, where is your family originally from? Where are you originally from? What is your homeland? The fourth house rules the home. So, your home, your where you lay your head to rest, where you have your private life, your family, the people that are in your home. The fourth house also, in a very specific way, because it's called a subterranean place, rules basements. So, are you remodeling your basement? Is something happening in your basement? Or are we talking about a metaphorical basement? Are we talking about the basement of your psyche and how your family's traits and generational trauma and generational patterns have impacted you? Or are we going way back to your family of origin? Are we going back to that home and figuring out what do we want to take from here and what do we want to keep in a metaphorical and a literal sense? This could be if you've been away for a long time, traveling home and reconnecting to your place of origin. The fourth house also has to do with land. So, someone buying a piece of land, it has to do with lands and homes in general. So, people with strong fourth house placements, they will often be, real estate agents. So, any connection to land and homes, this is the fourth house. The fourth house is the foundation of our chart. It is the least visible part of our chart. It is the things that are happening behind the scenes that very few people are going to know of. So we can see this as, the fourth house being connected to home and family. These are the foundations of our life. specifically your family of origin. We can also see this as the foundation of the place where you live and how, like, is your house clean and tidy? Do you feel comfortable at home? And then does that allow you to go out and just do amazing things in the world? Or is your home a place of chaos and that's taking away from all the other things you want to go out to do? So, the fourth house, because it's the subterranean place, it's a place that's underground. It is often associated with death as well. People with fourth and 10th house eclipses may often lose a parent. It doesn't always happen. Obviously, you've definitely in your lifetime lived through fourth and 10th house eclipses where you haven't lost a parent, and maybe you live through one where you will lose one within that cycle because it's connection to home and the parents. And the 10th house, for a lot of people, is associated with the mother. But ultimately, the 10th house is just associated with your primary caregiver. So, who was that person for you? Was that your mother or your father? The 10th house is the public place. This is the world stage, if you will. Like if the fourth house is, what happens at home, far removed from prying eyes, and the 10th house is you're out on stage, girl. People are looking at you. This is your career. This is how you show up in the world. So, what is your career? What are your public accomplishments? What do you, how is your status changing in the world? The 10th house is always reflective of the actions that you yourself have taken that have elevated or descended your status in some way. So it's like the 10th house is can be associated with marriage as well, because marriage changes your social status and how you're perceived on the world stage. Are you married or are you divorced? For the same reason that this can be, the 10th house can be associated with becoming a parent because that changes your status in the world. You're now a parent or, not a parent, whatever it is. So, having eclipses go across the fourth and 10th house, you're going to see changes in your home life and in your career. And those things can happen in tandem, meaning that one feeds the other. So, you end up moving homes to a different place, and now you have to get a whole new job. Or you get a new career opportunity, and that sees you going off to faraway places. Or you start a career in real estate. Or I've seen things of, like, let's say with the fourth house access, like digging deep into your familial roots and then finding where your family's from and then ending up writing a book about it. And the book, becomes a huge success. That's your 10th house. So taking something that's private and making it public. These changes don't have to be so interwoven with one another. They can be happening parallel to each other. So, yeah, maybe your career is rising and things are happening, but then, your home life is in shambles. Or maybe good things are happening on both ends, but there's just radical changes. This can be something as simple and as mundane as renovating your basement, like I said before. You're renovating your house. You're putting more energy into your home. And then, you're changing your career, you're moving in a new trajectory, or you decide to be a stay-at-home parent, like your social status has changed. You're now a parent and you're working from home, or you end up working from home for your career, starting a business within your house. This can also be, I think, because the fourth house is the foundation of who we are on a more psychological sense, this can be like a restructuring from the ground up. This is figuring out that the patterns that you learned from your family are maybe not so helpful for you in this new stage of your life. And how do we unlearn those patterns and what are the new ones that we want to learn? I would also see fourth and 10th house placements as fourth and 10th house eclipses as, having a child. Neither of these places are, associated with children, but those are major changes to your home and to your public face as well. So there is that possibility, or even something happening in the lives of your parents. Are they splitting up and now you have to move with one of them or help one of them? Or are your parents just, generally aging and then you end up having to take some time off of work? There's a million ways that this can manifest, and I want to remind you that eclipses don't determine the quality of the time period. So it's not going to say this is going to be good, this is going to be bad. One way, if you are trying to get a little bit of an idea of how the experiences will be for you, look at the planets in the signs. So, malefics like Mars and Saturn, they're going to give you obstacles, challenges, things you have to overcome. And benefics like Venus and Jupiter are going to give you positives, things that are like gifts and boons and things that are exciting and expansive and maybe even bring like good relationships into your life. So it's not as cut and dry as that, but that is a good entry level technique to start to ascertain the difference between, something being subjectively positive and subjectively negative. There's obviously so many mitigating factors here. So if you see something negative, don't get too stressed out or worried. Um, Fourth and 10th house eclipses, I would also say, and this is not going to be true for everyone, but this could also be when you die. Um, Again, like I said, not being true for everyone, but the reason why I say that is because the fourth house is associated with death. And I think it is because it's the subterranean place. It's the place that's hidden, and what's more hidden than death. And just to remind you, because I'm not trying to fearmonger here, eclipses happen frequently. Like it's this same eclipse corridor of Pisces and Virgo axis happened between 2015 and 2017, and then happened another, 10 to 7 years earlier than that, and another 10 to 7 years earlier than that. So it's like you've lived through this cycle, presumably multiple times. And it is good to look back and see like what happened then, and maybe some of these similar themes are coming up, but also I'm just saying, I don't want you to get scared. Like it's just like I'm just giving you the broadest possible things. Your career may end up taking off, your career may end up taking new directions. But yeah, Gemini and Sagittarius risings, please let me know how this feels for you. Is this accurate? Is it not? Just let me know. I would love to know about your experience and how this is all playing out for you. Hello, Scorpio and Taurus risings. You guys have been having eclipses going between your fifth and your 11th house. So, eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. And for you, these are happening in the realms of your fifth and your 11th house. So, what are these? The fifth house is the house of creativity. It is everything that you create. So, this is a creative entrepreneur, this is an artist, this is, a mother because she created a child, this is someone who created a play. The fifth house is, often business people have prominent fifth house placements because it's a creative process, creating a business. Like you're literally giving birth to something. In ancient astrology, the fifth house has everything to do with children, specifically your children, and sometimes even the children of others. So this could be working with kids or having kids, becoming pregnant, or something major happening in the lives of your kids, or your kids getting married, are they having babies, or are they struggling or going through something and then you end up having to help them, or are your kids, having these massive wins and, making lots of money, and then they're able to give you some money or do something for you. It's the fifth house rules because it is connected to children and childhood. It has this feeling of joie de vivre. The fifth house is the house of laughter. It's the house of good fortune. It's where we just enjoy life. It's where it's like, what do we do for fun? What do we do in our downtime? What are you doing just for the pleasure of it? It can also be about reconnecting to your childlike sense of self, your childlike sense of wonder, or even like activities that you loved and enjoyed so much as a child. The fifth house has to do with games. So people with prominent fifth house placements, they might be athletes because they are spending their life dedicated to a game. They could be a chess player, they could be a video game player, they could be an NFL player. Anything where your passion and your hobby is taking a greater importance in your life. So, having fifth house eclipses, it could mean that you end up having a new hobby, finding a new way of enjoying your off time, having a new leisure activity. Do you all of a sudden love to kayak, or do you love to do art? Have you just started a pottery course? The fifth house, because it's associated with leisure, it can, on like a negative end, kind of lean into hedonism. So, too much of a good thing, too much drinking, too much gambling, too much, partying, just too much of a laissez-faire attitude sometimes. The fifth house also has to do with dating. So eclipses in the fifth house can mean that you may start seeing someone new. The fifth house in relationships is all about like it's the courtship phase. It's when things are just starting. The first messages are coming through and things are just beginning to pick up. It's like we're going on dates and you're holding my hand and it's all exciting because none of it is serious yet. And the fifth house is also associated with sexuality and sex. So on one hand, it can be like, you have a new lover and it's a casual thing, but you really enjoy their company. Or the fifth house can represent our own relationship to our own sexuality. Are you sexually satisfied? What is your sexual orientation? And are you at peace with that orientation? Do you hide that orientation? Is that something that you are open to? I know, like, when I was going through fifth and 11th house eclipses, like, I actually accepted being queer for the first time. It was so crazy. Like, I never really accepted it, but then I did. And so it's like your orientation in sexuality is hugely important here. This could also be a greater interest in things like Kundalini or reconnecting to your creative self, and then, feeling more of a sense of joy and having more downtime, and then that improving your sex life with your partner. The If you do not want to get pregnant, Scorpio and Taurus risings, you better wrap that willy because this is a time of pregnancy. So if you don't, just, take all due caution. And pregnancy here can be, yes, in the birth of a child, or it can be the birth of a book, the birth of a new project, the birth of a new beginning. The fifth house is where you go to do the creative work. The 11th house is the audience that you give your creative work to. So the 11th house is the house of broader social networks, your friends, large communities of people. So this could be like going to a concert. You're surrounded by people, going and, becoming a vendor at a farmer's market or at a fair. The 11th house is also the house of like the internet. So joining an internet forum, um, anything, becoming an influencer, becoming more prominent in your, Reddit forum or joining an online community of some sort. Maybe you're joining a mom's club. That would be a perfect fifth, 11th house eclipse example. Or, you have some art that you've been working on very diligently, fifth house, and now you're taking time to promote it on social media, the 11th house. The 11th house is also the house of your hopes and your dreams and your aspirations. So, the fifth house, if we think of it as a place of gestation, where creativity happens, life happens, the growing of new life, and also the pleasure that sustains life. And the 11th house is where we give birth to it. The 11th house is where our creation is no longer ours. This is where our creation goes to the public. These are the people that receive our creation. So, if we're giving some examples of a fifth and 11th house eclipse cycle, one could be someone connects to their sexuality, realizes that they're queer or identifies in a specific way, and then they end up joining an internet community that also identifies that way, and then they become friends, and then through that community, they end up meeting their next partner. That'd be a classic example. Or someone is an avid woodworker and carves all these spoons. That's the fifth house of creation. And then they get involved in a market and become a vendor at a fair that travels around. That would be the 11th house, broader networks of people. The 11th house, this could also be someone has been making content on YouTube for a couple years now, and all of a sudden it blows up because they finally got their break with the solar eclipses going between the fifth and 11th house. The 11th house can also put us on track towards like what our ideals are. What are your craziest hopes and dreams? And do you have the courage to pursue them? So the fifth and 11th house is almost asking us to find what it is that gives us joy. And how does that joy impact the people around us? Does it change the groups we move into? Does it change the way we show up in these groups? Does it change our offerings to these people? What is our joy? And then what is our dream to do with that joy? Do you want to give it out to the world? Do you want to? Or another classic fifth and 11th house example would be, you become a parent and all of a sudden your friends who are also parents become more important to you because they're going through something that you also relate to. Be a classic fifth and 11th house example. Anyways, Scorpio and Taurus risings, please let me know if this relates to you. Please let me know how this feels for you and leave your story below in the comments. I would love to read it. Hello, Aries and Libra risings. You guys are going through an eclipse cycle that impacts your sixth house of health and your 12th house of mental health. So I'm just going to give you a forewarning here. What I'm about to describe, it's not going to sound that great. And it doesn't mean that these next few years are going to be terrible for you. The eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. They don't dictate the quality of the time. That is to say, they don't dictate whether your subjective experience of the period is positive or negative. There's so many manifestations of how this can play out that, take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm trying to introduce concepts that are on totally opposite sides of the scale. And there's always a middle way, there's always a middle ground. How these things are going to play out for you is going to be so dependent upon your birth chart and the planets in your birth chart. So the sixth house is the house of bad fortune. The sixth house is associated with the body. So let's start with the positive. On the positive, eclipses in your sixth house can indicate changes to your body and changes to your physical routines, your everyday routines that lend to your health. Maybe you decide to become more health conscious and you change what you eat. You started to get up and work out in the morning and, have a whole morning routine before you go to work. And this is really having a positive impact on your physical well-being as well as your mental well-being, which would be ruled by the 12th house. So if we think of the sixth house as the physical body, the 12th house is the mental body. The sixth house also rules sickness. So sickness, hospitals. So this could be a time period where you're dealing with an illness or an ailment that's sending you to a hospital, or you're just spending more time getting testing done and spending more time in hospitals than you have previously. The sixth house also rules quadrupeds. So that's to say like four-legged animals. Maybe, you have a animal pass on, or you get an animal come into your life, you foster an animal, or you start dog walking, or you work on a farm, or anything where you're working with or surrounded by animals. The sixth house also rules, in ancient astrology, it was called where like slaves were placed. So, in modern day, we're not doing all that. So that is people who are your subordinates, people who work under you. Are you have the people that are in your employment, how have they affected your life, and what are their actions and how are they impacting you? The sixth house is the house of everyday work. If the 10th house is your broader career and your public standing, the sixth house is the day in, day out routine. So, like I said, having sixth house eclipses can make huge changes to your routine. It can also make huge changes to your place of work. Is something happening at work? Is there drama? Is there gossip? Has your work all of a sudden become super busy? This is where changes in the workplace, we're going to look for eclipses in the sixth house. Has your job title changed? Do you all of a sudden have support subordinates that you never had before? People with prominent sixth house placements often are like nurses or doctors. They're working in the physical health industry and working in hospitals to heal ailments and sicknesses of others. I've often seen people with strong sixth house placements often being like healers or yoga teachers because the sixth house governs the body. So this is like working out. Did you take a class to be a personal trainer? Are you trying to be a Pilates instructor? Are you picking up an extra job that is like physical? Are you doing something in service of others? So this would be a good time to introduce the 12th house. The 12th house is the place of bad spirit. So this is like your mental body. This is your mental well-being. This is where addictions are placed here. This is an illness of the mind, not of the body, or the illness of the mind eventually becomes an illness of the body. So this is a time where the 12th house is all about solitude and seclusion. So, like, let's say with this axis, did you get sick and now are you in a place of solitude and you're having to work through some things that you haven't had time to work through before? The 12th house rules also like hospitals and prisons, anything where you are forced into some sense of isolation. This doesn't have to be so bad, though. It could be like you go on a retreat and you're in solitude or in silence for several days. And there you find something beautiful because you've been searching for something for a long time and you find it in solitude. You find it in seclusion. You go to a cabin in the woods and you finally write your book. You with the 12th and the 6th house axis of the mental body and the physical body, this could be like I've seen people stop drinking under these transits. They realize that alcohol isn't agreeing with their body and it's taking an impact on their mental health. So they decide to try sobriety out for a time period. Or we could have this in the inverse, someone moving and leaning more heavily on substances. The 12th house can also be the place of self undoing. So it's like, what are the characteristics that we have that are actually damaging ourselves? So, like drinking, not to say that drinking is inherently bad, but any pattern of behavior that is going to be damaging to you. It's also the place of the subconscious mind. It's like it's the hidden place. It's like if you have some memories that you've repressed for a long time and you're trying on this healing journey, a healing journey that encapsulates your mind, body, and soul. Well, maybe this is the place where we go into solitude and we kind of heal it. I'll give you a very specific example of my own experience of 6th and 12th house eclipses. I got really sick. Had to be off work for 3 months or so. The illness, they couldn't figure out what it was. 12th house of like hidden things. And I ended up basically living alone in my apartment for 3 months and didn't see anyone because I was so ill. I was living so far away from my family and couldn't really, like, just wasn't really traveling. And by the end of my illness, which I spent mostly in bed or like laying on my couch because I was so, incapacitated. And at the end, to like as I was getting better, I started dog walking. I like took care of dogs and that was amazing, by the way. And that ended up with me that whole time period of solitude. Like it sounded difficult, and in some ways it was, but it was everything that I needed because it showed me that where I was working at the time that I got sick wasn't where I wanted to stay. It wasn't something that truly aligned with my calling. And that set me on a new trajectory. I think the 6th and the 12th house are these houses that can present great challenges. So you might be going through a challenging period of time right now. But something I have noticed, and maybe this is more a 12th house thing, is that once we get all the way around the zodiac to the 12th, we're about to be reborn again into the first. So there's something about letting go and like a shedding that's happening. It makes you've gone through an entire eclipse cycle. So you've, explored who you were in relationship, explored your money and what you value. You've explored how you communicate and your home and your career and your children and your creative output and what you find joy in. And then you've explored your like physical body and you've gone all the way through the zodiac. So there's something that's like shaking up and unraveling here. And it doesn't have to be negative. It can be like you've gone through all these years and finally you're able to let go of something that no longer serves you. The It could also mean that you spend more time working in prisons, working with people who are largely isolated and segregated against society, or like working in a psych ward, or, going into a period of seclusion because you're actually training every day for an Ironman. a physical strenuous challenge that you're having to create everyday routines to achieve, and then subsequently like isolating yourself from the rest of the world to be able to achieve that goal. So the final thought, the 12th house is also the place of enemies. And I know that sounds crazy, and it is, but it isn't. I have found like transits to the 12th house, you may have people kind of come out of the woodwork that are actually working against you. Um, and it doesn't always have to be this like sinister type thing, but it could be that you notice you're having more issues with people at work, or you're having more issues with your subordinates, or there might be like something happen where, someone has to like someone has to go to jail because, they did something against you and now they're going to jail. It doesn't have to be so dark, of course. Like there's lightness to this as well. Um, you want to write a book because you're a writer, so you go into a cabin in the woods and you write a book. There's so many ways this 6th and 12th house axis can play out. I know it sounds negative, and I know that often when people are going through these things, they're going through challenging times. And the challenging times, I don't want to say they forge us and they shape us, but they can also be the times where we put down a lot of baggage that we've been carrying over the years. And even though it can be tough in the moment, I think often you look back and feel grateful for that time period for what you shed. So, there is positives here for sure. I just want you to know, and I want you to have hope that if you are going through something challenging, this is like the culmination. This is like everything kind of getting wrapped up. So, Aries and Libra people, please let me know. Leave your comments below and let me know how this resonates. Let me know your story. I would love to hear it. Thank you so much. Bye. Hello, Ca Sagitt Hello, Sagittarius and Gemini risings. Hello, Capricorn and Cancer risings. Hello, Aquarius and Leo risings. Hello, Pisces and Virgo. Hello, Pisces and Virgo risings. Pisces and Virgo risings, let me know how this resonates. Scorpio and Taurus risings, let me know how this resonates. Leo and Aquarius risings, let me know how this resonates. That's it. All right. Pisces and Virgo, Libra and Aries, Scorpio and Taurus, Sagittarius and Gemini, Capricorn and Cancer, Aquarius and Leo. Thank you guys so much. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and have yourselves a beautiful night. Hello, Libra and Aries risings.